Hello everybody, it's Sound in the Shallows 79, and as you can hear, this is only Bridget Plass speaking, but that doesn't mean to say it's not good news, because it really is. Adrian's home and he's doing ever so well, remarkably well really. He's walking and talking, and I think hopefully by next week we'll be able to do our normal thing together, which will be really nice. Um, yeah, I think he's okay, remarkably, and I do want to thank you for genuinely for all the prayers. Actually, it is a pretty great recovery, and also thank you for all the messages. It's been so nice, and some of them are from people that we haven't been in contact with for far too long, and some of them are from people that we thought may have forgotten us, and some great messages. I'll just tell you a couple of them that I particularly liked. Although, I no, don't get me wrong. I meant sort of interesting bits that I thought you might all like to hear. One of them was talking about when you find yourself between a rock and a hard place. And she said, everyone knows it's a rough place to be in, but at least you can't be blown over. Put it this way, who's your rock? And the hard place has been fixed there for extra support. Well, bearing in mind that this all started with Adrian falling over, and also bearing in mind that there's been incredible storms in the UK, I think that's quite a good thought, that if you are in a really hard, rough place, between a rock and a hard place, you can't be blown over. And the other quote was from somebody who knows that Adrian loves cricket, although I don't think we'll talk too much about the cricket until it improves a bit at the moment with the Ashes. But this person said, life does bowl a bouncer occasionally that hits us on the head, but I'm sure you'll be up ready to hit the next delivery for six, which I thought was really nice. You know how when you're spending a lot of time on your own, you hear yourself talking to yourself? And I was really struck by the fact that my quote of the week has to be, oh, that's the least of our problems. First of all, because of not this storm, but one we had a little while ago, which came through the roof and made a hole in the ceiling of our bedroom. And I hadn't realised it had sort of got into a bit of our wardrobe, the bit where I keep a lot of my linen. And I found it was all damp. Now, another time, I think I would have been really, really upset. And I heard myself saying, oh, it's the least of our problems. And then I think I may have mentioned that the fence at the end of our garden blew down in that storm. Well, it's blown down again now, mind, least of our problems. And then the dog, who really hates the wind and the rain, and I have to say she is very small, and going down our garden, she decided was not where she felt like pooing, and so she pooed on the carpet. And again, normally I would be really fed up. Oh no, I said to myself, it's the least of our problems. And I thought, well, they can't all be the least of my problems. And I thought, well, I think it's because this has thrown everything into perspective, the right perspective maybe. A long time ago, Adrian and I went to Zambia, and we were there to look at the work being done by World Vision. It was actually a village called Zamtan, which had been decimated by AIDS. I mean, that was such a big thing at the time, wasn't it? And in this particular village, the middle section had, if you like, been blown away. There were the grandparents and there were the children, but it was the adults that had died, so many of them. It was the first time I'd heard the words food security. It was the first time I'd seen what it really meant to be living on nothing at all. There's a maize sort of porridge that people eat. In Zambia it's called shima. I know it's called different things in different places. And seeing the maybe almost excitement if they had something to add to the maize meal, to add a little bit of flavour. We met so many extraordinary people there, people taking in children and you know, that when they couldn't really manage themselves, and so much sacrifice, so much good stuff. So when we came back, and we'd been away for about 3 weeks, it was a shock. Of course it was a shock. And we both vowed that we would keep things in perspective, that the unimportant things really, really were the least of our problems, that there were big world problems. And I remember taking my daughter, who'd coped really well with us being away, and I remember taking her out to Starbucks, it was actually, for a milkshake, and she had the works. It was an amazing milkshake, and it cost an amazing amount of money. And I found myself feeling deeply ashamed because of the contrast between this, which was a big treat because we'd been away. And I don't mean I didn't feel the need to justify the treat, but my perspective had changed. The awful thing was, of course, that after a very little while, things sort of cloud over a bit, and you find yourself worrying about, I don't know, I think we always coined the phrase, you know, comparing the price of kitchen rolls, but you know what I mean, quite trivial things became quite important things, almost problems. So that was, I suppose, one of the things that's really, really happened this week. And as a memo to self, it's really important for me and you know, to not take Adrian's recovery for granted. There were a lot of very clever people involved in the hospital, in the paramedics and the people in A&E, and a lot of prayer. And the other thing that struck me this week was the value of being prepared for something. I don't mean we could have been prepared for this, actually, and maybe we should have been, I don't know, but I don't see quite how. But you know, one of the things that Adrian said, and it would be lovely if he's able to talk to you next week about some of the things, but he said he felt as though he'd been abducted by aliens, because I think I said to you that he had no memory at all of Friday night, Saturday or Sunday, and the operation was late on Sunday night. So he wakes up in recovery, surrounded by people, tubes and people peering over him and things coming in and out of him. And somebody says, yes, you do have 2 holes in your head. And I think he genuinely felt, you know, where am I? What has happened? No, is this an episode of Doctor Who? What's going on? Because he had no memory and no preparation. Obviously, sometimes preparation can be really difficult because it involves a lot of fear, especially if you're going in for an operation, or some of the experiences people have had with COVID, knowing that you know, if they're going into intensive care, understanding what the result could be. So I'm not sure I'm saying it's easier, but it has struck me as we're thinking about Advent and we start looking in these weeks before Christmas, number one, how important it is to keep our perspective. You know, if we can't get the right cranberry sauce, surely it's the least of our problems when we have something to celebrate. But I was thinking about Mary, and I was thinking about her 9 months. And I remembered something that we put together years and forever ago. It was actually first written, there was a series of little monologues for local school children to perform in a sort of joint schools all together, primary schools actually, top end of primary schools in our local town. And like so many other things were written locally, and then they've ended up in books and becoming really much more part of the public domain. But I thought I'd just read you a little bit, because one of the characters who had a monologue was the angel Gabriel, and I'll just read you a little bit of his, her, whoever's monologue. There's a phrase you humans use that we angels are not at all keen on, something to do with not shooting the messenger, because of course that's a big part of what we angels do, you see. And well, let's face it, There must have been more than a few of your lot in the past who would have cheerfully shot us when they saw what was delivered in the divine post. In fact, most of us winged thingamybobs prefer to be entertained unawares. Take Gideon, for instance, suddenly informed in the middle of beating out his son blessed that he, the champion all-comer twit in the Israelite national twit of twits competition, was supposed to take on hundreds of thousands of highly trained Midianites with what, in the end, boiled down to 300 men armed with a selection of objects from the hardware store. And then there was Jacob, slippery, soupy blessing burglar. One of us had to go and actually wrestle with him. Wrestle, I kid you not, proper hand-to-hand stuff. Can you imagine? Now, who did we send to look after that one? Not me, that's for sure. Grappling on ladders, definitely not my style. Yeah, certainly not me. I'll tell you what I had to do, though. You see, I did have a message. It was quite an important message, and in my case, well, it was wonderful. I suppose sometimes we bring the best news in the world, and I was going to be allowed to take the best of the best tidings to, well, she wasn't much more than a child, really. So beautiful she was, so, well, didn't really matter what she looked like, but she was so clean in her spirit, if you know what I mean, full of morning sunshine, something in her eyes, her face, the way she was so still. I'm not sure I think I've ever seen it in any other human, except, of course, for her son. He was the image of her, or perhaps I should say she was the image of him. Even we angels get a bit muddled with our theology sometimes. Mind you, she didn't think it was very good news at first. I mean, I did do my best to break it gently, but it wasn't easy. I mean, for a start, you don't meet angels every day, do you? I said something like, "Hello, Mary, you really are special and very lucky, and I've come to tell you that God is with you right here. He's right here with you." Well, you should have seen her face. I don't think she felt lucky. I think she felt terrified. I was a bit bothered about carrying on. I mean, the next bit, well, was a bit tricky, to say the least. "Come on," I said, "don't be frightened. Don't be frightened. You see, you're going to have a baby. And God has chosen you to have his baby. And his name will be Jesus, and he'll be great, and he'll be called the Son of God, and he'll reign over the house of Jacob, and the kingdom will go on forever and ever and ever." And, well, of course, only one thing had registered out of all that lot, hadn't it? A baby. A baby. Her eyes were huge and round and frightened. You see, she never, she hadn't, she didn't. A baby. I honestly thought she was going to faint for a moment, and I said to her as gently as I could, "Now look, don't worry. The Holy Spirit will organise everything, and it'll be God's power that makes it happen, and you, Mary, will give birth to a baby who's going to be called the Son of God." And then, in a funny sort of way, I reckon this was the clincher, I went straight on to tell her my other bit of startling news, which was about Elizabeth, and she was going to have a baby too, and actually she was 6 months already. You know what? Her face was a picture. She didn't actually say anything for a moment, and then there were these 2 huge tears welled up in her eyes, and she said, "Oh, Elizabeth, after all these years. Oh, thank God." And then she looked dead straight at me with such a brave expression on her face. And what do you think she said? This teenager who just met an angel for the first time, being told she was going to conceive a child by some method beyond comprehension that her fiancé was most unlikely to go along with, and that this baby was going to end up being some over almighty everlasting king, the Son of God. She said, ever so quietly, she said, "I'm God's servant and I belong to him. And if that's what you said to me, if that's what he wants, I want it too." And I suppose it was when I listened to those steady words and gazed into that young girl's clear, untroubled eyes, shining now with the spark of a new deep excitement, I really began to understand why God had chosen her. And then I left. Job done. And it did strike me all over again as I found that little thing that we'd written. We've often said that the angel said Mary was deeply blessed, and immediately the Bible tells us she was deeply troubled. But even in that tiny time, she seemed to accept something that for some of us it takes a lifetime. And then she obviously had 9 months to accept it even more, to acknowledge and accept that her future was going to be very, very different from the future maybe she'd planned. Very different for Joseph, very different for her future and her children's future. She accepted that there was no going back, that once she'd said yes, that would be it. I came across a poem this week, and that's what we're going to finish with. It's not a Christian poem. In fact, I read it in connection with death, I suppose, and I can't really pronounce his name quite properly. It's Khalil Gibran. As I say, not a Christian. It isn't written about God, but because I love the hymn Oceans, I love the idea of being called into the sea, to trust and to follow, where your feet can't touch the bottom and where you have to rely on God. I thought, I'm pretty sure we're going to be okay, but it has made me face a future in a way I've never faced before. So I thought I'd finish by reading this. I hope you like it. It meant a lot to me, and maybe you'll understand why, bearing in mind the week that I've just had. It is said, it's called The River Cannot Go Back. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has travelled from the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages, and in front of her she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there's no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear, because that's where the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. I don't think I want to really try and explain why that was so important, but I would absolutely love, and I know Adrian would, to hear what your reaction is to that, or to anything else that we've talked about. And as I say, I really hope that next week, when we get to number 80, Sounding the Shallows, Adrian will be with me. In the meantime, God bless, and we'll speak to you next week. Thank you. Goodbye.